Yo, what's up, RotoGrinders, and welcome to Sharp DFS Analysis here on RotoGrinders.com. My name is Chris Gimino. I am the projected ownership analyst here at RotoGrinders, as well as a wearer of many hats. And joining me to go over the Week 13 NFL action from a Vegas and advanced analytics standpoint, we've got two of the smartest guys in the business. We've got Chris Raybon, senior DFS editor at 4for4.com. Chris, what's happening?
What's going on, guys? Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving, good week and stuff, and let's get back to it.
Great week, great Thanksgiving. Looking forward to an even better week here in Week 13. Also joining us, we've got Warren Sharp of sharpfootballanalysis.com and sharpfootballstats.com. Warren, what's going on?
Hey, guys. I think we got a better card this week, at least in terms of games that I'm seeing some value than we have the past few weeks. So I'm looking forward to this Sunday.
Yeah, man. We got also more games this week. There's going to be a total of 15 yet to come, 13 on the DraftKings main slate, 14 on the FanDuel main slate. And, of course, we've got short slates to deal with. So a lot to talk about when we talk about week number 13. One of the things that we need to talk about every week, Chris, when we take a look at what's going on in DFS is the idea of cognitive bias or recency bias. It's something that affects basically everyone. Everyone's got biases and opinions. And, to some degree, you have to have that. That's kind of what makes you you. But the problem is with these biases that exist out there, a lot of people tend to remember what happened most recently, and they tend to weight what happened in the recent past more so than the overall picture of analysis that can be presented to them on a week-to-week basis. So that presents a lot of problems. You can make a lot of mistakes that way. What in your mind, what are the pitfalls of recency bias, and how do we avoid making those mistakes when it comes to what happened most recently?
I think the pitfalls of recency bias is obviously that you're simply weighing the most recent information too heavily, more heavily than you should be. And I think the key to avoiding it, just like with any of the other cognitive biases, such as like anchoring bias, availability heuristic, bandwagon effect, like clustering, there's so many of these biases that you guys can just do a quick Google search and you can kind of find a pretty succinct definition of them all. But avoiding them really comes down to first just knowing they exist. Knowledge is power. That's kind of a cliche term, but in this case, I think it's true. And once you're aware of them, you just kind of have to question yourself and question your own thinking and whether do you have these biases or not. And in DFS, I think it really kind of comes in where you can leverage that with ownership. And the way you do that, one of the ways anyway, is I created something on 4for4. I created a metric that we have on 4for4 called GPP leverage score. And what that does is it kind of takes stock of the whole slate and it calculates a probability of each player hitting what we've deemed as a GPP value. And then it looks at, okay, based on the entire slate and all the players available, how much should each player be owned according to what their probability of hitting value is. And then the leverage score, one, it would be like average. And, anything above one essentially says that a player is going to be owned less than what his probability of hitting value would imply. So you can kind of just look at things like that and say, there's always going to be a few players in a given week where, the public tends to flock to the top few options at each position. And then there's a bunch of players that kind of are in that middle tier of probability that they just kind of go a little bit under-owned compared to what their true expectation is. And you can kind of leverage that. And at the same time, there's always a few players that end up being chalk or end up being really high owned. Maybe it's because they're in a good spot or it's because of recency bias, they've had a couple of good games, but their ownership kind of really gets inflated, and it gets inflated to the point where their ownership is higher than what would be implied from their probability of hitting value in a given week. So you can kind of leverage those two things and kind of try to fade the players that are going to be a little more high owned than you think is reasonable for his probability, and you can at the same time target players and go a little bit overweight on the players who you think are under owned. I think that's really the best way to kind of attack recency bias. And, just also keep in mind that I actually ran the correlations for each position. And if you look at just the last game, there's no correlation between a player's performance in his last game and his performance in his next game. And even when you go 3-4 games back, there's still very little correlation for every position outside of running back. Running back tends to stabilize pretty quickly only because I guess they're getting so many touches and, things kind of change quickly. If you have a back that got, let's say, 20 touches 3 games in a row, you can probably count on him getting a decent workout unless he's, benched or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind. Receivers, highly volatile, quarterbacks a lot of times matchup dependent, tight ends matchup dependent. So the last game or the last few games is not necessarily going to tell you much. And you really have to keep in mind other things like strength of schedule. Warren always talks about, very important. A player could have a good streak, and it's simply due to just a strong strength of schedule. So if you keep all those things in mind and just be aware of it, I think you can. You kind of figure out yourself, like it makes itself known how you can benefit from it, because you're going to just start to know and say, oh, hey, this is probably recency bias, the reason why everyone's talking about this player so much, or the reason I like this player so much. So just being aware of it, I think, is the key.
In any DFS sport, people will tend to look at what happened recently in terms of game log watching, and they'll try to make the assumption that something like a hot streak is real. But really what's behind a hot streak is a set of underlying metrics related to his performance that are predictive. Some of those things may have told you that those performances weren't predictive, and it's really goes beyond looking at what happened most recently and just using that as a means to predict what will happen. Because like Chris said, he said there's really no correlation between what's happened as far as player performance and what will happen. So there's the underlying portions of research that go into what happened in those games that really need to be focused on. Warren, when you take a look at the betting markets, the books and the line makers have to be aware of public perception as far as where the public thinks these teams are, because they'll have an understanding of where, the bets might go. I mean, maybe I didn't word that quite correctly, but there is definitely an element of understanding public perception and what happened most recently, I assume, in what you do. And how do you avoid, certainly getting those biases yourself, and how do you exploit them when it comes to the totals you work with on a week-to-week basis?
It's a great question, and it's a great topic to discuss, especially this part of the season. Although, weeks 2 and 3 are highly prone to recency bias, obviously, because we only have we have very little data to work with. But, the key, at least for me, is to dig down into the underlying statistics of the final score, because a lot of people are prone to be swayed heavily by what happened with the final score. Who ended up winning this game, who covered the spread, and that's all they care about. A lot of the people out there don't have time or the resources to watch every single game that's being played simultaneously. So they are not going to, and they're certainly sure as hell not going to go back and rewatch the games. We're talking about like average Joe public here. So they just look at the final score. They like to bet on the primetime games. They want to see, hey, Joe Flacco looked like he struggled on Monday night against the Houston Texans. Wow, the Ravens should suck this week. Things like that. I'll give you another example, like Brett Hundley with the Green Bay Packers, and this is where schedule comes into play as well. If you look at Brett Hundley, you might say, and now granted he had a good game last week, but you might look at him and say, wow, he hasn't been all that great. I'm not sure what he's going to do this week. This team is just struggling with Hundley. He's not doing well. But if you actually look back right now where we sit here in week 13, take a look at the defenses that he's played. He has played nothing but top half defenses. If you look at the Saints, the 5th best, he had a bye week, then he played the Lions, who are 14th. I'm talking against the pass. The Lions are 14th. The Bears are 15th. The Ravens are 2nd, and the Steelers are 7th. We're talking about some ridiculously strong pass defenses that Brett Hundley has faced. Now he gets to go up against the 30th ranked pass defense. So if you were just, and granted, it's not a great point to make right now because he did have a nice game last week. But if you're just to look at him and say, wow, he's not doing all that great, but without taking into context the schedule, you're going to be missing out, and your bias against what you just saw recently and what you think of Brett Hundley intuitively are going to be hurting you when you're trying to handicap and forecast what's going to happen this upcoming week. So definitely public, the books obviously look at what the public is thinking on games, and they're lining the games. But the reality is they're lining the games on what they think the line should be, but they are shading it a little bit to the forecasted action that they believe they're going to get. And some games are going to be completely one-sided, where they're going to absolutely need a team. And I can tell you, sure as hell, example of what we're going to see this Sunday night. They are definitely going to need Seattle in this game, because much like The Philadelphia Eagles were completely bet by the public, and even the Sharps at the beginning of the week when they went down to Dallas and just absolutely annihilated Dallas a couple of weeks ago. The public is all over the Eagles in this spot out in Seattle. So, they know what the public thinks. The public loves what they just saw. I will throw in there real quick before we wrap it up that the public has been crushing it of late. I mean, the last 4 or 5 weeks in the NFL have been absolutely just terrible for those guys who are betting underdogs. And, I was talking to Evan Silva about this a little bit ago, on one of the other shows that we do together. And the hard part is when you are betting like we do and my group does, we're going to be betting opposite the public. I mean, we're going to need to be rooting for bad quarterbacks. We're going to need to be rooting for bad teams because you may win going the other way, but there is no value. There's no value in betting on some of these overinflated favorites. Of course, they're the better team. Of course, they have the better quarterback. That's why they're the favorite. And then they're being shaded beyond reasonable measure because they know the public is coming in on these teams. So at one point, whether it's this week, I hope it is, or in a near future, the underdogs are going to start barking once again. And all the recency that the public keeps betting Philadelphia and covering the spread and rolling it over and rolling it over. Like, I'm not saying I'm on Seattle at this moment, but what I am saying is that that's going to be a side that the books need is Seattle. And that's generally what you want to align yourself with if you're betting on games is sides that the books may need. While doing your due diligence and making sure that that's a side that you agree with as well. But it is absolutely vital to try to avoid recency bias and cognitive bias and just view things as objectively as possible and understanding the context of how people are scoring these, how the players are scoring these points and how the games are ultimately landing in the final score. One last example, the Carolina Jets game. That was absolutely a ridiculous final score. The Jets had that game locked up. They gave up a defensive, I think it was a fumble touchdown, then a punt touchdown, and they end up losing the game, what looks like by a wide margin, and Carolina covers. But the actual game itself was far different than what the final score indicated.
Pay attention to it. Know it's there. A lot of biases, as Chris mentioned, for you to be researching and figuring out whether or not your analysis on a player is being affected by something other than the information that's being presented to you for his matchup, his situation this week. Obviously bias is going to exist. You're not going to get rid of it all, but you need to just make sure that you're avoiding having a tremendous deal of recency bias, cognitive biases of all sorts when you're making your DFS decisions. All right, guys, let's check out some of the games that are going on this week and try to figure out where we think there's an advantage to be had, either from a total perspective or a spread perspective in week number 13. High total games this week, there aren't any. So that section was really quick. As far as low total games are concerned, we got Indianapolis and Jacksonville, I think qualifies, Denver, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, but pretty much everything else is somewhere in the middle. So, Chris, when you take a look at all these middling totals for the week, where do you think we can actually find a secret high total buried in there?
I think this Green Bay-Tampa Bay game is one that I'm looking at, and particularly because I think Green Bay can have more success than they're being given credit to in the line. Warren kind of started to allude to it. The Tampa Bay defense has just not been very good. And this is especially true when they go on the road. I know we've talked about this on this show before, but Tampa Bay on the road this season is allowing 311 passing yards per game and 2 touchdowns per game. At home, they're pretty okay. They're allowing only 262 passing yards and 1.2 passing touchdowns per game. So big discrepancy there. They really struggle on the road, and their road games haven't exactly been against a murderer's row. I mean, they did play Atlanta and Minnesota. In New Orleans, they also played Buffalo and Arizona and Miami. And at home, they played the Bears, the Giants with all of their receivers healthy, the Patriots, the Panthers with Benjamin and Funchess in the lineup, and the Jets, which have proven to be a pretty decent offense. So the strength of schedule isn't crazy tilted to where there should be such a discrepancy, yet it is. And, overall, Tampa Bay, one of the worst pass defense. If you look at DVOA, they're 30th in pass defense. And, just not really having a lot of success. And on the other hand, you have Brett Hundley, who, we got to remember he is still a quarterback in his getting his first real starting experience. In 2 of his last 3 games, he's had a passer rating of 110 or higher. He also had, I know people know about the 245 yards and 3 touchdowns last week against Pittsburgh, but he also had 110.7 passer rating, 18 of 25, 72% completions, 212 yards and a touchdown against the Chicago Bears in Soldier Field in a win for the Packers a couple weeks ago. So I think this is a really good matchup for him, and given his price on DFS sites and the way the slate is kind of breaking down, where we actually have like a plus minus value metric over at 4for4, where we don't really like to look at points per dollar, because that's not looking at like a linear multiplier like that is not always going to tell you what's going on with value. But so instead we look at kind of this plus minus, and if you look at the quarterbacks, you're going to see the top projected quarterbacks in terms of raw points: Tom Brady, Phillip Rivers. Those guys are all in the bottom 5 in terms of value, whereas you see guys like Brett Hundley coming up on top at their lower salaries. It's just one of those weeks where there's not as much value. I'll say it this way: the top quarterbacks on the slate have been priced appropriately, maybe even a little too high this week. And so, given that, I think you really do want to look at Brett Hundley in this matchup, and I think the Green Bay Packers can score some points in this matchup. Devontae Adams having a lot of success. The Buccaneers are 32nd dead last in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed. 2 wide receivers. They haven't been good against the run. They're allowing 31.2 points per game overall on the road. That's 30th in the league. So just a lot to like, I think, on the Green Bay side. I will say this: if you're, the total open, I believe it was 43, and it got bet up to 45. So I don't know if there's as much value if you're just straight up betting on the total. And now that it's been bet up a little bit, there are some concerns about Tampa Bay on the other side of the ball. They are going to be without DeMar Dotson and Ali Marpet. That's their one of their tackles and their center. And both of those guys are in the top 6 of their grades at their respective positions in Pro Football Focus grades. So that's going to be tough for Tampa Bay. But at the same time, Green Bay has really struggled to defend wide receivers. They are 31st in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. So you still have Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson. You have Jameis Winston coming back. So there should be, enough to kind of get some offense on both sides in this game.
Yeah, and, one thing that might help Tampa Bay as far as those linemen being out is the fact that it looks like Kevin King is, he's questionable at best to be out there this week. I don't really expect to see him out there. So you're going to have a cornerback who couldn't get on the field over King, over like Quentin Rollins, over all these guys who rate so poorly in, all these cornerback metrics that are out there, trying to cover a guy like Mike Evans or Deshaun Jackson. So there's going to be some opportunity to make up for that pass rush if things don't quite work out there in that respect. Hopefully Jameis is back and playing well and able to be elusive of any kind of pass rush that's there. I do think that this is a game that I'm very much interested in as well, and I like to take here as far as a game that could go over the implied total right now. Warren, lots of games out there left. We have 15 total to choose from here. Any other games that you've looked at as a potential spot where there could be some value?
We got on I put out a total and we bet it earlier in the week. It's kind of gotten away a little bit, so I'm not going to discuss that one, but I am going to talk about another game that I also got on that has not moved quite as much, so there could be a little bit of value still remaining. It's in one of the low totaled games that you were discussing that people might otherwise overlook, but it's the Denver-Miami game. And to understand this game, this is where you have to understand context, because I think with cognitive bias, a lot of people think that Trevor Siemian just sucks. I mean, he's terrible. That's why he got benched, and he's a no good quarterback. But the reality is, I'm not going to say the guy's like a Pro Bowler, but he's better than what they've had in there. No doubt about that. But take a look at what this kid did. Started out the season 3-1. Had a bye week and came out against the New York Giants. And in that game, he didn't have a great game, but he threw a pick six, and he tried to tackle the guy running out of bounds. I think it was Janoris Jenkins, and injured his shoulder. Now, think about from the perspective of Trevor Siemian. Like, you're a backup type guy. Your team has other quarterbacks that they're trying to get in there. So you're going to try to tough it out. So he goes back into the game. Obviously finishes poorly. The next week, I mean, they have the option to start Brock Osweiler, who Denver acquired. They also have Paxton Lynch there. So Trevor Siemian toughs it out. And he toughs it out. Keep in mind, in that Giants game, they lost Emmanuel Sanders in the game, and they lost their right tackle in the game. So they were down those two guys. So the next week, guess who they play? The LA Chargers, who have a great pass rush. Also, Demaryius Thomas was banged up in that game. His ankle was injured. He caught only 2 passes for 9 yards. And they got blown out 21-0. Trevor Siemian was not healthy. His shoulder was still messed up and sore, but he was trying to keep his starting roster spot. And the next week they go and play the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, without Emmanuel Sanders. Demaryius Thomas is starting to get a little bit healthier, but they still lose that game 29-19. Then, and those 3 pass defenses, they're not great. I mean, the Chargers are great, but the other 2 aren't great, but they're much better than who they're going to face in the Miami Dolphins. They then bench him. And they let Brock take a couple of starts. Then they put Paxton Lynch in there last week. Another key thing happened before last week's game was that they fired their offense coordinator and promoted Bill Musgrave from the quarterback's coach. His obviously first game was not very good, trying to craft a game plan, even though it was against the Oakland Raiders with a very inexperienced quarterback, Paxton Lynch. They now have a clean slate. Trevor Siemian's back in there with something to prove. Bill Musgrave is in there with something to prove. They have both of their wide receivers fully healthy, ready to go. And the other key factor here, and I know this is a lot of narrative type stuff, but the head coach for Denver is Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins just last season. He knows which guys get beat on double moves. He knows how you're going to block that that defensive line best to give your quarterback a little bit more protection. Like anything he can get from his year with the Miami Dolphins, he is going to take and put into this game plan in desperate need of a victory. So I haven't really even talked about a ton of the matchups here, but there's a lot of things that go into this game that I think have edges towards production for the Denver Broncos offense. The Miami Dolphins pass defense is just not very good. It's going to be the easiest pass defense that Trevor Siemian and the Broncos collectively together have faced since way earlier in the season. On the other side of the ball, I think Miami is going to have a little bit of success with the short passing game. I envision them having a similar type of game plan like they did against Carolina, who has a better pass rush than what Denver has this year. Against Carolina, it was a lot of short, quick passes. Miami put up 21 points in that game. They still lost, but 21 points would go a long way to getting this game over a very low total that still sits at 39.5. In addition, you've got some other edges that favor the Miami Dolphins. Denver's without Aqib Talib. Denver's also without Domata Peko, who's anchoring the number 1 run defense. And Denver's pass defense only ranks 19th this year. They're not nearly as good as what they were in years past. Now they're without, their number 1 cornerback in Talib. So there's some edges here. I mean, Chris Harris still a great slot corner. He'll probably match up with Jarvis Landry, but for the other guys, I think that there's some edges there. And I'm not predicting like 28-30 final score or something like that, but 39.5, 39 is not a high total that you have to get over. So I think there's a little bit of value still in this number.
That should be reassuring for some people in the DFS world who are out there looking at some underpricing on guys like Sanders and Thomas at the wide receiver spot, getting quality wide receiver cornerback matchups with guys like Tankersley and Howard this weekend. I think that there is some reason to be encouraged by the idea that Siemian could possibly be, a victim of some of that recency bias we talked about. And we haven't seen him do a lot recently, and therefore, we're going to automatically label him as a guy who is potentially risky, and maybe the players that's associated with him as risky. So I do like, applying that knowledge as far as the total is concerned over to DFS, the idea that there could be enough in the way of production from the Denver side to make those guys viable. And you did mention that, the Miami passing game does have a chance too with the absence of Talib. I'm not ready to make a statement that I'm going to be completely all in on any of these Dolphins guys, but I do think you mentioned they have a chance, and I think that that's clearly a reasonable way to think when it comes to week number 13. Chris, when you take a look at some of these favorites that are out there this week, there's certainly always favorites that like Warren said, the public's been just smashing lately. Some of these public teams that have been favorites and just been doing really well. But when it comes to someone who might struggle this week, I think you gave me a couple of ideas who you might turn to on that respect. What's your favorite?
Yeah, I think the Chicago Bears may struggle. This is probably a game not too many people were thinking about. They are at home. They actually opened as 5.5-point favorites over the San Francisco 49ers. Right now, that's sitting at only 3 points. So it looks like people have been betting on the 49ers, and I kind of agree with that. I think that, you look at San Francisco, and the first thing you kind of see is, okay, this team has a terrible run defense. I got to start Jordan Howard. The Bears run the ball. This is a perfect matchup for them. They can just crush, home favorite. But actually, over the last 5 weeks, going back to week 8, San Francisco is actually 12th in run defense success rate. If you look at sharpfootballstats.com, they're actually 12th in run defense success rate. They're 20th on the season, but 12th over these last 4 games since week 8. And that's the first kind of red flag. And then you look at Chicago on the other hand, and over that same span since week 8, Chicago is 23rd in run defense success rate, 29th in pass defense success rate. And that's a big drop from what they were doing earlier in the season. They have had some tough matchups, but this defense really hasn't been as good. It coincides somewhat with their safety, Adrian Amos, being injured. He is going to be out this week. He is PFF's number 2 rated safety, kind of holding things together on that back end. And without him in there, this defense hasn't been as good. They will get Danny Trevathan back, which will help. But I do think that, you have Jimmy Garoppolo in here. We don't know too much about Jimmy Garoppolo as an NFL starter, but we do know, he's had 95 attempts in this league, and he has a 110.1 passer rating, 67.7 completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. So, this might actually be a pretty solid quarterback that San Francisco is putting out there. We know they have Kyle Shanahan and, pretty good offensive coordinator. If he has a good quarterback, I know Jimmy hasn't been in the system all that much, but I don't necessarily think that that's a negative when you think about it from the perspective of Chicago really has nothing to go off of to game plan, to prepare for with Garoppolo either. And when you have a smart OC like that, I think you can kind of use that to your advantage. I don't think it's necessarily a detriment. So for all those reasons, I think I don't think the Chicago run game is going to have quite as much success as people may think. And, Chicago really hasn't been doing a good job of consistently getting their best playmaker, Tariq Cohen, onto the field. He'll have a game where he touches the ball maybe 8-10 times, and then he'll go back to touching it 3-4 times in the next game. So they really haven't been able to incorporate him consistently. And it's been a tough go for that team, for that passing game. They don't really have good coaching. We know that, John Fox, and just another little edge for San Fran, if you're looking at the point spread or whatnot, is, if this game comes down to a field goal kick or something like that, San Francisco actually has Robbie Gould, who kicked in Soldier Field for a number of years. So they are forecasting 13-mile-per-hour winds in Chicago in Soldier Field for this game. But Robbie Gould, the 49ers kicker, has a lot of experience kicking in these very factors, made a great career out of doing it for a number of years. So I think San Francisco has a lot of edges in these games. I like Marquise Goodwin. He's been averaging about 20 yards depth of target. And I mentioned you have Adrian Amos out. I think Marquise Goodwin has a good shot at getting behind the defense, and he's going to have a quarterback that should be more accurate than the last 2 quarterbacks he's played with, Brian Hoyer and C.J. Beathard. So I don't think that this is a gimme at all for Chicago, despite San Francisco being a 1-10 team.
So a couple questions related to the narrative that you're describing right now as far as how the flow of this game could go with potentially the Bears struggling for DFS purposes. Now, if, let's say, there is some success to be had from Garoppolo and Marquise Goodwin, is there any potential catch-up time? I don't want to call it garbage time because I don't think this game is going to be a blow-up, but would it be, passing game, which we're not used to seeing from Chicago being in play here, because most people are looking at, like you said, Jordan Howard in the run game. Is there anything on the Bears side that you could bring it back with if you thought that San Francisco could have a successful game moving the football?
Yeah, I think if you're just looking at dollar-for-dollar plays on the Chicago Bears, I know most people are looking at Jordan Howard, but I think Dontrell Inman's probably the best dollar-for-dollar play on that team. Over these last 3 games where he's been a Chicago Bear, Dontrell Inman has been their number 1 wide receiver. He has 5 more targets than any other Bear over that 3-game span, 109 more receiving yards than any other Bear over that span, and 159 more air yards than any Bear receiver over that 3-game span. So Dontrell Inman, 35% share of the Bears air yards over these past 3 weeks, and that's pretty high total for any receiver, over a third. So if you get into a situation where the Bears have to throw, and that's what's going to have to happen, because that 35% air yard share is not really going to mean much if they hardly throw the ball. But if they are throwing the ball, we've already seen Inman go over 60 yards a couple of times, 2 out of 3 games. So I think there's definitely some value to be had in Dontrell Inman, and that's really where the 49ers have been struggling. They've lost one of their safeties. They've lost a couple of their safeties to injury. Their cornerbacks, they traded Rashard Robinson. They've really struggled kind of at the cornerback position. And over since week 8, they're 23rd in pass defense success rate, 12th in run. So the pass has actually kind of been their weakness. And that I think, just from a value perspective, Jordan Howard's been priced up a little bit on both sites, especially on FanDuel. So I think from a value perspective, Inman is probably, a better dollar for dollar value play in this game.
Would be an interesting way to go if you're kind of fading the public a little bit here. I don't think that'll be a popular or highly owned situation in DFS whatsoever. Warren, when you take a look at the rest of these, these totals out there, like I said, not a ton of high totals. As far as the spreads are concerned, there's really a lot of spreads that are between, like right in that 3 range. Is there any one of those particular spreads that you think is either off in favor of the underdog, or is there anything that stands out as unusual?
Yeah, you actually mentioned kind of the range that I'm actually looking at here to go with this one, and that is I like the Jets. I like the Jets. I think they're going to win the game. I mean, that's a little bit perhaps aggressive, but like I said before, they possibly should have beaten the Carolina Panthers last week. They're playing great football right now, but extremely underrated. They've lost back-to-back games. They've lost, 6 of their last 7 games, something like that. But I'm selling Kansas City. I think that's not a surprise that a lot of people are down in Kansas City, especially after what they did last week, dropping the game at home to Buffalo. I think if Kansas City, like the biggest issue that I can't understand, and I am assuming it's just because the offensive line isn't playing well, but they're not hurt. They're actually healthier than they were to start the season. They can't run the football. Kareem Hunt is at some times he's not getting enough touches. At other times he's just not doing anything with the touches. And if they can't run at home against the Buffalo Bills' bad run defense, keep in mind what we were talking about heading into that game was how the Buffalo Bills' run defense was so terrible the last few weeks after getting rid of Marcel Darius. They still have the same run defense, but they go in there and they once again shut down Kareem Hunt. He's not going to get it done in New York against the Jets and their run defense, which right now is like the strength of that defense. Conversely, what is one of the biggest things that's been burning the Chiefs of late? It's explosive passes. Their explosive pass defense has been very bad on the season. They ranked 24th, but the last few weeks, they've played teams who are terrible at explosive pass offense so far this year. If you look at their last 3 games, the Cowboys ranked 29th, the Giants ranked dead last in the NFL, and the Bills ranked 23rd. Now they're going up against the Jets, who rank 8th offensively in explosive pass offense. A big shock to their system. I think the Jets are going to be able to push the ball down the field. Robbie Anderson. I think they're going to have some success there. And if they can get the run game going just a little bit to help supplement and augment that, I think they've got a great chance of grinding the Chiefs down. The Chiefs, I've been talking about this for the last couple of years. They're a great like regular season team, and they usually play great in games like this against mediocre offenses, poor defenses. Like in years past, they will come in here and limit the Jets to like 13 points and win like a 16-13 type game. But we thought we saw them changing, and we also thought that this was a team that could be capable of doing better things in the playoffs when they actually face some good offenses because of how aggressive their offense was getting. But that just has not been the case. Ever since they couldn't run the football, they're not taking the deep shots down the field. There's a lack of confidence or urgency in pushing the ball down the field and having a lot of success in that. So I think the Jets offense here has a pretty good shot at, the defense can contain that sort of neutered Chiefs offense a little bit, and then the Jets offense can get a little bit aggressive on their own. I think they've got a good shot here.
Stumbled upon something on your website today, Warren, called Playoff Success Factors Matrix. And this factors in explosive passing, rush efficiency, pass rush, red zone efficiency, factors that lead to contributing to you getting to the playoffs and also succeeding in the playoffs. And Buffalo Bills are dead last in that metric, and they just defeated the Kansas City Chiefs last week, a team that was beaten pretty handily by the New York Jets not too long ago. So certainly this take as far as the Jets defeating the Kansas City Chiefs, I would not consider it a hot take based on what I've seen from those teams recently. And then recognizing we don't want to just focus on what's happened recently. There's a lot of other factors baked in there that, lead me to believe that that's an excellent take as far as what could be transpiring here this weekend. So look for the Chiefs to struggle yet again if Warren is correct.
Yeah, and actually, just to interrupt you real quick, the Chiefs actually ranked very low on that matrix. When I first built that thing up at Sharp Football Stats, that was one of the first takeaways is, I'm just taking 4 key metrics and putting them up there, and these do correlate well to success, especially getting to and winning in the playoffs. And they were one of the teams who was slotted to make the playoffs but was very low in this index. And they've obviously been trending even worse. This is year-to-date data, but their recent trends, we talked about looking at recent trending stuff before, has been worse.
All right, Chris, now it's time to take a look at what's going on with offensive analytics that can help us in week number 13. Looking around the league, what have you kind of found most interesting as far as DFS is concerned as a way that we can possibly take advantage of some analytics and metrics?
Well, looking at Todd Gurley's matchup against the Arizona Cardinals at first glance, we all know they have a strong run defense, fourth in run defense DVOA, but I think there's really an edge to be had for Gurley in the receiving game against the Arizona Cardinals. Over the last 5 weeks, the Cardinals have allowed 9.3. Well, over the last 4 games, I should say. It's been 5 weeks, but over the last 4 games, they've allowed 9.3 catches per game to running backs. That's tied for most in the league. And on the season, they have allowed 68 catches to running backs. That is tied for 4th most in the league. So they're giving up a ton of production through the air to running backs, and I think that helps give Gurley a higher floor and a higher ceiling. We know Gurley is 3rd in the league in receiving yards among running backs, and we also know Robert Woods, who was their number 1 receiver for the Rams. He's going to be out. They're going to need to put those targets somewhere, and we're going to have Sammy Watkins probably get locked down by Patrick Peterson in this game, so that should free up a few more targets even once you account for somebody like Cooper Kupp or Josh Reynolds or somebody like that who kind of stepped up last week. You're still going to have some more targets to go around. I think Todd Gurley is the guy that's going to get them. And Arizona's run defense hasn't quite been as strong as of late. If you go back over those last 4 games, they're only 16th in run defense success rate, actually have been better against the pass. They're 7th in pass defense success rate. So I don't think this is a prohibitive matchup for Gurley at all. I actually think it's a really high ceiling matchup for him. We kind of saw that last time these teams played 7 when they in London. Gurley carried the ball 22 times for 106 yards and a touchdown. Also caught 4 passes for a good amount of yardage in that game as well. So I think this is a good spot for Todd Gurley, who, among backs, that are still active, not counting Ezekiel Elliott, Gurley's in the top 3 in touches per game. He's in the top 3 in snap rate. So Todd Gurley, I think, in another one of these really good spots, even though the defense might not jump out at you on paper.
Yeah, I just want to share a tiny amount of concern I have for Cooper Kupp this week. It's not a big concern. I think he'll probably get volume, probably a good play in DFS. But when I looked at the numbers for Terry Mathau covering the slot in more recent weeks, his numbers have been going upwards. He has a lot of pass breakups, doesn't have a lot of touchdowns in his coverage this season. And, Tramon Williams, for some unknown reason, has been playing pretty well, which would kind of take care of Reynolds. And, of course, you got Patrick Peterson on Sammy Watkins. So if I look around at the matchups, and Sean McVay will find a matchup that he likes somewhere in there, it's kind of it's almost got to be you're down basically to Gurley or a couple of those athletic tight ends as a means to get it done here. Obviously, tight end's not a fantastic spot to target against Arizona, so it does make a lot of sense that in the passing game that Gurley could have some involvement this week if they expect to find success. Not that you can't have success against Mathau. I guarantee it. As a matter of fact, you will see Cooper Kupp get targets, and he'll probably have a decent game here. But I like the take here that Gurley could be in a good spot for production, just following that logic that I found when I was doing my wide receiver quarterback research this week. Warren, as you're taking a look at the landscape here, week number 13, offensive analytics or an offensive matchup that you like?
I'm going to fade recency bias here. We'll talk about another running back, but sort of going against one of the games Chris was talking about. Not that I disagree with his take, but just a player in the game, and that's Jordan Howard. If you look at the run defenses that the 49ers have faced of late, the run offenses that the 49ers have faced, last week they played the Seattle Seahawks. Don't even have a run game. I mean, Eddie Lacy was their dude. The Giants before that, again, like they're 25th in the league in rushing efficiency. And then week before that, the Arizona Cardinals, who are 31st in rushing efficiency. They have played just two teams, have the 49ers all year, that rank top half in run offense. And that's the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. And both of them completely shredded this team. Where this gets to recency bias is the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely slaughtered the Bears last week. I mean, took a humiliating just loss right on the top of John Fox's head. And right now, I think Jordan Howard, if you look at what he's done against mediocre to poor run defenses, he's been phenomenal. Now, they haven't played very many of them this year. They've played, since week 3, they have played 7 games. 7 of their 9 games since week 3 have been against top 10 run defenses. Just not even top half, literally inside the top 10 in terms of run defense. The San Francisco 49ers obviously have not. Their defense has played, like I just mentioned, a very easy schedule of opposing rushing offenses. And the last time that Jordan Howard faced a team who wasn't great stopping the run, that was the Detroit Lions, who ranked 23rd. He went, 15 for 125, scored a touchdown, averaged 8.3 yards per carry, very high success rate as well. Not just he broke a 50-yarder, but he was also solid on those other 14 rushing attempts. The 49ers ranked 22nd, and the 49ers 22nd ranked run defense comes against the NFL's easiest schedule of rushing offenses this year. So completely fading, what we saw last week out in Philadelphia. I think Jordan Howard could be in for a big game on the ground.
PlayerProfile.com has a game script metric that basically tries to describe the situations in which a player has been getting his opportunity. And 28th is the ranking for Jordan Howard here as far as the Chicago Bears are concerned in game script. It's not a good situation most of the time when he's seeing the ball. I do want to say that I don't think that Chris's analysis that the Bears could struggle is necessarily mutually exclusive with Jordan Howard having a good game. Certainly one way that Jordan Howard could have a good game is the Bears play their traditional game, and it's a run heavy approach. But I just just because of his role in that offense, number 6 in dominator rating on playerprofiler.com as far as Jordan Howard is concerned, just that having that kind of opportunity within an offense could inherently allow him to produce even if the Bears do struggle. So I do like the idea that Jordan Howard could have success this week. I haven't necessarily landed on whether or not I'm going to have a heavy exposure to him in DFS this week, but I do think that it is a completely logical take to have that this is a situation where he could succeed. Chris, what do you think about Warren's Jordan Howard take? And then if you don't have anything on that, what have you got as far as follow-up to that?
Yeah, I think definitely, again, when you look at it, Jordan Howard's in a spot to succeed, home favorite going against a team that has given up a lot of rushing production. I'm just not bullish on the Bears' chances of, getting that kind of game script to where he's going to truly have a smash spot. Even against Detroit, where he did very well, he only had, I believe it was 15 carries in that game. So he kind of needed a couple of big runs to make that happen. And another thing, I know people are looking at, San Francisco's production, just fantasy production allowed to running backs. A lot of that has kind of come in the passing game as well. They gave up was it 100, a bunch of yards to Ezekiel Elliott, over 100 yards to Chris Thompson, 86 yards to Andre Ellington. So there's a lot of things in there that I think are a little bit noisy. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Howard had a big game. And this is, home favorites are when a team or back will usually exceed expectations and kind of go into those smash spots. I'm just kind of, I guess, going a little against the public in this one. And, I feel like this is a game the Bears could struggle in, that the 49ers could have a little more ball control than maybe you're used to seeing them have. So that's what I think. But as far as another play that I think could struggle, the New England pass defense has gotten a lot better as of late, and it's not recency bias. It's pretty much ever since the kind of after that first month of the season. The Patriots' first 4 games, they allowed 128 points over those first 4 games. In the 7 games they played since, they've allowed 98 points. So they allowed more points. They allowed 30 more points in their first 4 games than they allowed in their next 7, and that's kind of been a direct result, I think, anyway, of their pass defense. It's really improved. They haven't had a quarterback pass for more than 237 yards or 1 touchdown in any of their last 5 games. So I know some people out there are making a case for Tyrod Taylor in DFS. I think a lot of that's to do with how cheap he is and the fact that he usually plays better at home. But I don't think this is a great spot to play him against these New England Patriots, who are starting to click on all cylinders. You're starting to see Malcolm Butler and Stephon Gilmore be able to play man coverage and lock people down. And we know Belichick knows how to game plan. A lot of the Bills' success passing has been on first down schemed plays, where if those plays work, they have some success and they can move the ball. But Bill Belichick, I think, is one of those guys that he's going to know how to stop that. He's going to force them into doing things that they don't really want to do. And, I'm not really liking the spot for Tyrod Taylor. I know because a lot of people might be looking at the full season metrics for New England, and their pass defense is still going to come out rated pretty poorly, but they have not been giving up production in the pass game recently. Got a couple of lucky breaks with some teams turning the ball over down in the red zone or on their side of the field and whatnot. But that's just part of it. They can force turnovers. They do have that secondary that's starting to play well. And against this Bills team where you just had Tyrod Taylor get benched a few games ago for a guy that then came in and threw 5 picks and a half, and now Tyrod Taylor's back. I don't necessarily think that a flawed quarterback like this is a guy that I want to target against these Patriots. The only thing I'll say is the Patriots do play a lot of man coverage, and that's usually beneficial to a mobile quarterback. So that's one positive for Taylor, that maybe he can get some rushing yards going. But again, Belichick knows this, and I think at this point it's going to be a really tough go for the Buffalo Bills in this game, even though they're at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to rack up that rushing yardage in garbage time when the Patriots run like the most beautiful 5 or 6 minute drill you've ever seen, just absolutely kill the clock. That's obviously one situation that could occur here as far as the end of that game is concerned, but I do expect the Patriots to have a lead. And when that tends to occur, like I said, they do tend to, they won't be allowing too much garbage time for the Bills here. I do not like the Bills this week. I do not like Tyrod Taylor, so I'm in agreement there. Warren, from a defensive perspective, who could struggle this week?
Well, I'm not sure what his status is right now, but because I know he was on the injury report with the illness, but I'm completely selling DeMarco Murray, doing some research on him. Just his efficiency on the early downs has been terrible. I really think that they need to go with Derrick Henry much more often. And I think that the Tennessee Titans, for them to be favored by 7 points here, I think is a little bit much. And this is where you definitely have to divorce yourself from the bias. I hate Tom Savage. I really do not like him as a starting quarterback, but he's been playing better, and he did have a couple of very difficult defenses that he's faced. This Tennessee Titans defense is not very good, and I can definitely see Houston having a little bit more success offensively in terms of controlling the clock, which would obviously hurt the prospects of Tennessee having tons of opportunities to just call run plays. And while they will inevitably use DeMarco Murray here, I think that I don't think he's going to be quite as productive, quite as successful. And so I'm just selling DeMarco Murray.
That's a pretty damn good sell if you ask me. Hasn't looked good passing the eye test, and certainly Derrick Henry metrically looking a little bit better than him right now. But hey, if you're Tennessee, just keep running the ball. Let's not bother using the talented weapons they have in the passing game enough. Let's make sure that we withhold the skills of Marcus Mariota and make sure we run that exotic smash mouth scheme until we're bored to absolute tears.
I mean, you've got Dion Lewis priced at 6,300 on FanDuel, and DeMarco Murray is 6,200. You know, he's the same price as starting running backs in the Oakland New York Giants game. You know, both Marshawn Lynch and Orleans Darkwa are 6,200. So I just don't see him getting to that level, but obviously could be wrong.
Anything can happen, but don't play DeMarco Murray. All right, Chris, let's take a look at the chalk this week. Interestingly, you know, with more games on the slates, 13 and 14 games, it leads to situations where things get spread out just a little bit more than we've seen in some of these shorter slates, a little bit more opportunity to find low-owned players in a situation like this. A position like quarterback I expect to be very spread out in terms of ownership. I mean, that's always the case, but I think that'll be even more the case than usual just because there's so many cheap quarterbacks to go to and some of these higher dollar quarterbacks, as you mentioned, not in tremendous value spots. So I don't expect there to be a ton of chalk at the quarterback position. Running back and wide receiver, I think you could see a little bit different story. Let's talk about the chalk this week. Where have you found value in the guys that are available at the high ownership levels?
Value, I mean, I really like DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's going to be high owned, but I think he should be. I mean, he's averaging over 12 targets per game with Tom Savage. Probably we'll see a lot of Adoree Jackson, who has actually played well for the Titans, but I just don't really think you're stopping Hopkins at this point. I mean, we saw him score a touchdown on Patrick Peterson from Tom Savage. So it seems like the only person that was really ruining DeAndre Hopkins was Brock Osweiler. DeAndre Hopkins has produced at pretty astronomical levels going back to guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick, Brian Hoyer, now Tom Savage. Of course, he was with Deshaun Watson, but I think this is just another good spot for him. He's had 200-yard games with Tom Savage in these last 4 starts, averaging about 100 yards per game with Savage. So I don't see any reason to fade him. One kind of probably be somewhat chalky just because of their high implied total is the Chargers. I'm a little concerned about their passing game. Not that I don't think they can be efficient, but just because they rank 27th in pass defense DVOA. However, they still haven't allowed a 300-yard passer all season. They're allowing only 31.3 pass attempts per game. So you could just see kind of some muted volume out of this San Diego pass offense. They're going to have to be ruthlessly efficient. Phillip Rivers probably going to need that 3-touchdown game because the Browns have been kind of limiting the yardage for these passes. Teams haven't really been needing to throw the ball a lot because you're kind of building a lead on this team. So from that perspective, I think that it could be a little bit of a trap. Rivers and Allen both priced up a lot, and that's really kind of the issue too. Is that under normal circumstances, you have a great matchup or a good matchup like this, and you can kind of take advantage of the pricing. But the site's kind of adjusted and put Phillip Rivers and Keenan Allen at the top end of their positions in terms of salary, and I think that's could be a little bit of a trap just because of the way Cleveland has been going so far. Now, I think it will improve a little bit if Casey Hayward, who left the team for personal reasons, if he misses the game, and we do have Josh Gordon back for Cleveland. So we could see maybe a better Cleveland offense than we've seen in the past. I know Deshaun Kaiser has been a little better lately, so that's a positive. But I'm not liking these prices for Rivers and Allen this week.
Yeah, by the way, Cleveland, let's get Dave Njoku in the mix more too. I mean, you've got all these weapons. I mean, obviously, I don't expect the Browns to have a tremendous game here, but just with Josh Gordon back, if there was for whatever reason, some defensive absences, you mentioned Casey Hayward potentially missing, tragic story. Some reason to believe that what you're saying with Rivers and Allen struggling could be the case here in this game due to lack of volume. Warren, when you take a look at some of the injury situations out there, we could potentially be without some Packer running backs that would make Jamal Williams amongst the chalk this week. You are going to be looking at Kenyon Drake owned on some sites in the DFS world out there. Might even see Melvin Gordon with higher ownership due to the Chargers total. You'll see Mike Evans and Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks, Jared Cook, double whammy of being highly owned, and he looks like Beetlejuice from the Howard Stern show. You got the Jaguars D. Of any of these chalk guys, anyone stand out to you as an interesting spot for value this week?
Yeah, I think chalk for me, and I'll be Tom Brady. I just think his spot is too good to pass up. I will say that I kind of agree with Chris's take on Phillip Rivers, although I don't know what your guys' opinion of this being chalk or not, because I'm shocked as I'm scrolling down here trying to find where Hunter Henry is priced. But Cleveland, obviously, terrible against tight ends, and they're very good against run defense. So I do think Melvin Gordon's going to have a difficult go at it. I think they will have to throw the ball a little bit. And if Phillip Rivers is struggling to hit Keenan Allen, I mean, Hunter Henry's the guy. Now, it's hard as hell to anticipate the usage rate that he's going to get. So maybe that's why he's priced as low as he is. But I think he's got some certain upside there for sure.
I mean, if Hunter Henry hasn't got it done this week, it's definitely because he just didn't get that volume because, as Chris mentioned, there's some schematic things that the Browns do that should theoretically lead to tight ends getting more targets. And if tight ends get more targets, Hunter Henry is one of the most efficient tight ends on the market these days. A lot of reasons to believe that he could have success. He actually will be kind of chalky, I think, Warren. So I don't know that he will be completely unowned, especially because of those price tags on the DFS sites. But like I said, I think people are going to be looking at Jared Cook with the elevated volume. We're going to be looking at Gronk with the homecoming narrative and the fact that he's Gronk as being highly owned guys in DFS this week. But Hunter Henry may go a little bit through the cracks. I don't expect him to be super low owned out there on the marketplace. Chris, when you talk about guys who are going to be low owned, though, there's going to be plenty of those big slates. Who's interesting to you?
I think Stephon Diggs is really interesting. There's a lot of receivers. You mentioned Cooper Kupp. We know Robbie Anderson's going to get a lot of ownership kind of in that price range as well. Devontae Adams, too. So just because of all these other chalk wide receivers kind of in the same price range as Stephon Diggs, I think his ownership is going to be held in check. Then you got to remember that people are also going to be looking at Adam Thielen, who's been a monster of this whole season. So, but I think the key for Diggs is that Desmond Trufant, the Falcons' top outside cornerback and top cornerback period, is looking like he's going to miss this game. He's in a concussion protocol. It doesn't look like he's going to be cleared in time, barring a big surprise there. So, I mean, Trufant has been their best cornerback. He's out of their top three. He's allowing the fewest targets, 48 targets, lowest passer rating, just 85.0. So, Diggs, even though he's taken kind of a backseat a little bit to Adam Thielen this year, still ranks 13th in FanDuel points per game among receivers, 17th in DraftKings points per game amongst receivers. We saw him have already the two monster games earlier this season, two touchdown games in the first 3 weeks. And I think in this game against Atlanta, I think you're going to, you have a situation where Case Keenum doesn't really take many sacks, has been over 280 yards in 4 straight games. He can get the ball to these guys. He can get the ball to Diggs, and, defenses can't just double Diggs because you got to worry about Adam Thielen. He's moving all around the formation. So I think this is a spot where we can see Diggs kind of have another one of those spiked weeks, and it won't be at crazy ownership just because there's so many other receivers that people are going to want to own in that price range as well.
Call back to earlier in the show, Playoff Factors Matrix, sharpfootballstats.com, the Case Keenum led Minnesota Vikings, number 4. If you expect that there's going to be some secondary issues for the Falcons with Trufant out, and looks like Brian Poole hasn't practiced. I think he might play, but if he doesn't play either, forget it. Case Keenum Vikings could be in a pretty decent spot here. That could be interesting. I think they're indoors too, right? They're in Atlanta. Yeah,
and that's always a good spot for fast guys like Diggs. Thielen's going to get his no matter what. But yeah, Poole looks like he has a back injury. He hasn't practiced. They do expect him to play, but banged up. So that's another thing to watch.
All right, Warren, under the radar, or you could call them just a spot where you think we could find some unusual value in DFS this week. What have you found for us?
One guy Chris actually mentioned, but I think his partner in crime, his twin brother with the same first name, both the Devontaes this week. I like Devontae Adams and I like Devontae Parker. I think if you got Devontae Parker down in Miami. Look, it's not sexy. Nobody's going to be on this guy. They're playing, well, I don't know who am I to say, but I don't think many people would be on him. They're playing the Denver Broncos pass defense, but they're without Aqib Talib. Chris Harris probably is going to line up in the slot, try to neutralize Jarvis Landry. I think there's opportunities, especially with Miami. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot here. It's a good run defense, and that's the weakness of Miami. They've gotten a little, is the run offense. They've gotten a little bit more towards the pass. Now they get Jay Cutler back. So I'm thinking that Devontae Parker could have a little bit of value. And I do like Devontae Adams. His chemistry with Brett Hundley has been good. And we talked about this from the top of the show. The defenses, the pass defenses that Green Bay and Hundley have faced have been just a murderer's row. And now they get to face one of the worst in the NFL. So I like both the Devontae brothers.
I think you might have inspired me to make a little bit of an edit to my wide receiver cornerback analysis on RotoGrinders.com this week, in the sense that I looked at Parker and, based on alignment, like a lot of his snaps are going to be probably against Bradley Roby, but I don't think it's going to be all of the snaps that he'll see in this game. And if it's him or Stills that's going to see Roby, and whichever one doesn't see Bradley Roby is probably in a pretty good spot, like you said, as far as the matchups are concerned this week. So I think that's interesting. I want to make that edit that basically mentions that Parker could be in a good spot here, if he's not seeing 70-80% of his routes run in the coverage of a guy like Roby, and even if he does, he's actually talented enough that he could even find some success anyway. So I don't want him, I don't want to make that sound like he's in a bad spot here, like I did in my article. I'm going to go make that edit. But other than that, I think you make a great point on Devontae Adams specifically.
Raybon, what do you think of that
one? Parker. I think it's Parker. So I think Parker is in a better spot just because Cutler. If Cutler's going to be back, Cutler tended to favor Parker more, whereas I think Matt Moore had a better rapport with Kenny Stills. So that's like another thing. Again, we don't, like Chris said though, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, who's going to line up on Roby more. I mean, Roby's their third best corner. He's still pretty good. Chris Harris would probably line up outside in 2 wide sets. So that's another thing. It's a complicated scenario, but I mean, I do think I agree. I think Parker will be lower owned because he'll probably be at like 1%.
Yeah,
he'll be lower owned by far than the probability of him having a big game. So yeah, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and that's why I said I'm going to do a little bit of backtracking here. That's all I'm trying to say. I think you've convinced me, Warren, that this isn't as bad a spot as I initially thought for specifically Devontae Parker.
What were you saying about Adams?
So Adams, I mean, you take a look at what's going on there in Tampa Bay. I mean, forget it. I mean, he's going to be probably lined up with like Ryan Smith a lot of the time. Robert McClain would slide out to the outside, which would probably be even better for Adams if like Hargraves plays. But if Hargraves doesn't play, it's probably going to be a lot of Ryan Smith. And certainly, I think that Adams is #good and could beat Brent Grimes any day of the week anyway. So I'm not even concerned if he ends up seeing a lot of coverage from Brent Grimes. And that secondary as a whole, just does not rate well in any stretch of the imagination. Every macro metric I looked at looked bad for the Buccaneers. Every micro matchup as far as the cornerbacks is concerned looked bad. We see Brett Hundley displaying some talent last week. I mean, it's just a situation where, I said it before the season started, I thought Devontae Adams might emerge ahead of Jordy Nelson this year anyway. We're seeing that a little bit, and I think, I don't think that's a detriment to Jordy Nelson as much as it is a credit to how good Devontae Adams really is. If you look at your target and output adjusted success, your tours metric, Devontae Adams is, soaring towards the top just like he did last year. I just absolutely love him as a player, and I couldn't love the spot too much more for him this week. Raybon, any thoughts on Devontae Adams?
Yeah, I think, if you look at Brett Hundley this season, Brett Hundley has had 182 pass attempts. 52 of them have gone to Devontae Adams. That's 28.7%. So that's by far the team lead. It's a lot of targets. On those 52 targets to Adams, Hundley's averaging 8.0 yards per attempt. On his 130 other pass attempts, he's averaging 5.9 yards per attempt. So I think Hundley-Adams is kind of the stack that you want to kind of build around to start with. I mean, I could see Jordy Nelson having a good game. I could see Randall Cobb having a good game. This defense has not been good, and it's not really a tough defense to beat. They're going to play some zone, and a veteran like Nelson or Cobb, they can definitely find the soft spots. But Adams is really what makes Hundley go. And I think the matchup is great. I think he's had 5 or more catches in each of the 4 games after the bye, with Hundley kind of situated in here. He scored twice, and he also caught a touchdown. He's caught 3 of Hundley's touchdowns. No other Packer has more than 1. So I really like Adams in this spot. I think he'll be owned highly, but I think rightfully so. I think he's in a really good spot, really breaking out this year. He was kind of doing that even with Aaron Rodgers. He was breaking out, kind of. Jordy Nelson was still catching a lot of touchdowns, but Adams was kind of being that go-to guy. I think we saw Xavier Rhodes shadow Adams in the first meeting with Minnesota earlier this year, which is kind of telling. So like Devontae Adams this week as well.
Excellent stuff, guys. Once again, that's going to do it for our show here in Week 13. One more time before we check out, go to sharpfootballanalysis.com, sharpfootballstats.com, and get all the incredibly valuable information that Warren has to offer on his website. If you're interested in some deep analysis, some unique metrics, and some overall great content from NFL specifics, you can go to 4for4.com and check out what Raybon and the team is doing over there from a DFS perspective and really from a football perspective in general. And also, of course, RotoGrinders.com, RotoGrinders Premium. Get your information for football, basketball, golf, all the sports, one rate, and get a lot of value from your subscription fees when you come over to RotoGrinders, hang with us in Premium. That's going to do it for the show. Best of luck in all of your contests. For Warren, for Chris, I'm Chris. We'll be back Week 14.